Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for the first online lesson in our Heritage Education series. My name is Amy Sunny and I'm the Director of Education at the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach. The Foundation's mission is to preserve the architectural and cultural heritage and the unique scenic quality of the town of Palm Beach. And we do this through advocacy, training, events, and education, just like this event today. For many years, we've been offering this Heritage Education series in several local schools, and we're excited to now offer this series online. This series explores the built environment. Now, usually when I'm in the classroom, I'll ask the students if they know what that means. So since you're following along at home, I hope that you'll try to think of answers to the questions that I ask along the way. The built environment consists of all the buildings around us that have been built over time. There are schools, our houses, our churches, shopping centers, apartments, everything that's been built around us. And throughout this series, we're going to learn about the development of the built environment and the changing architectural styles over time. So today we're going to start with our first lesson in the series on the Native Americans and the first structures. So let's get started. So when we talk about the Native Americans, we want to first talk about Florida's first people. And if you look here on the map that's on the screen, you can see that this has several different tribe names. And when we talk about the first people, why do you think that we're talking about the first people, or why do you think we're calling them the first people? If you said because they were the first people to inhabit the area that we now know as Florida, you would be correct. So we're talking about a long, long time ago, more than 12,000 years ago. Some of these tribes were here much, much earlier and were inhabiting the area that we now know as Florida. So how do we know about these first people? We know that they're lost tribes, right? They don't exist anymore today. And so we have some reminders, though, when you look at Florida geography and you look at some of the cities that we have in Florida, we have some reminders of the earlier tribes that were there. So everybody take a moment to look at the map and let's see if you can find any names of cities that relate to some of the tribe names that you see listed here. All right, so hopefully everybody took just a second to look at that. Now, several of them people tend to get pretty easily, so I'll point them out in this order. Usually everybody sees that Miami, right here in the middle, looks very similar to the city of Miami in South Florida. Also, Tequesta is another one that usually our school children in this area will tend to be familiar with. However, there's a few others on this map that are a little bit harder to see. So maybe you could try looking up at the north part of the map. And if you see the word Pensacola over here, and Appalachia, or what we now call Apalachicola, and there's one more right in the middle that everybody has a hard time with, and that is the Ocala or Ocala tribe right here. So how do we know about these lost tribes? Now we know that these tribes don't exist anymore. So what do you think we could use to tell us about the lost tribes? And specifically, especially when I'm working with fourth graders, I like to ask if anybody can think of any primary sources. So something that was written by a person at the time that the event was taking place, to see if you know of any primary sources that could tell us about the lost tribes. So one way is the Spanish ship logs, right? The Spanish kept wonderful logs when they were moving around in the area that we're calling Florida now. And so we have those Spanish ship logs to go by. We also have Jonathan Dickinson's journal. Now, if you're here locally, you've maybe been to Jonathan Dickinson State Park, or maybe you had to read part of Jonathan Dickinson's journal. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. It tells about Jonathan's experience when he was here in Florida. So I encourage you all to take a look at that if you haven't had a chance to. So how else do we know about the lost tribes? Does anybody see the picture here on the screen? And maybe you can think to yourself what the people in this picture are doing. Does anybody have any ideas? Well, if you said that they're doing archaeology, you would be correct. So, archaeology is the study of human past through material culture, and an archaeologist digs up and then studies objects like pottery, tools, and building materials. So you can see here that the archaeologists are studying this site, they're excavating the site to see what they can find to tell us more about the lost tribes. So when an archaeologist is working, they might find two different types of things in their sites. So the first would be fossils, which are evidence of living things that have been preserved in the Earth's crust. They might also find artifacts, which are items that have been made or modified by humans. So just a little quiz for everybody listening in at home. If I were to say that somebody found a shark's tooth, what would that be, a fossil or an artifact? A shark tooth would be a fossil because it's evidence of a living thing. But what if we found a piece of pottery? Do you think a piece of pottery would be a fossil or an artifact? The piece of pottery would be an artifact. Now, what about if we found a whalebone that had been carved into a knife? What do you think? Would that be a fossil or an artifact? That would be an artifact because it's an item that has been modified by humans. So I want to talk just for a few minutes about a few of the different tribes in the area. So the first one that I want to talk about is the Miami tribe. Now the Miami lived around Lake Okeechobee. They built large mounded villages. They hunted and fished for their food, and they loved to eat turtles. Now, does anybody watching at home think that they would like eating turtles? I'm not sure that I would like that, but the Miami seem to love it. Next, I'm going to talk about the Yaga and the Hobe. Now, they lived on the Jupiter Inlet, and they lived in wigwams, which were made of poles stuck in the ground to create an arch and covered with palm fronds. The men wore breechcloths made of grass, and the women wore skirts made of Spanish moss, and they loved to eat raccoons. Now, does anybody out there think that they'd like to eat raccoons? Ooh, I don't think so. If I don't want to eat turtles, I don't think I want to eat raccoon either. And for all of you ladies that are listening in, how do you think that you would feel about wearing a skirt made of Spanish moss? Do you think that you would like that? Or why might you not want to wear a skirt made of Spanish moss? Usually when I'm in the classroom with my students here, we have a lot of creative answers about why somebody may or may not want to wear a skirt made of Spanish moss. But I'll give you a few of the most common ones. Usually the students will say that they don't want to wear Spanish moss because it would be itchy, and also because Spanish moss has bugs. So I'm not sure that you would want to go around wearing a skirt that has bugs crawling all over it. I certainly wouldn't want to. So we're going to talk about 3 different types of Indian mounds today. Now, a mound is a man-made pile of earth, sand, and pieces of broken objects like pottery, tools, or building materials. And we're going to learn about 3 different types: middens, burial mounds, and platform mounds. The first up, and you can see it in this photograph, is a midden. Now, I want everybody to think about this like a trash heap. A midden is a place where indigenous tribes put their trash, leftover food, broken utensils, and tools, or the remains of a cooking fire. And shell mounds would contain mostly shells. So remember, as we're working on learning about this, a midden is a big trash heap. Next up, we have burial mounds. Now, the tradition of burial mounds began 4,800 years ago. The bones of the deceased were placed on the ground. The pottery was placed to the east of the burials, and the bones and pottery were covered with sand, creating a dome shape. Now, an interesting fun fact is that some of the mounds could grow to be very tall, and that might be because sometimes they would actually bury their dead standing up. So if you could imagine if somebody is standing up, you could see why the mounds would get to be so tall. Next, we have platform mounds. Now, a platform mound is a flat-topped mound of dirt where important buildings were built. They were used for temples and homes of the important tribe members, and a home was destroyed when the owner would die, and then they would build on top of that mound. So the higher the mound, the more important the home, or the more important the temple, and the highest mound was always reserved for the temple. Now, this is a depiction of the Crystal River site, and I wonder if anybody out there has been to visit the Crystal River site or might know where it is. Does anybody have a guess as to where it might be? If you said on the west coast of Florida, you would be correct. I was actually fortunate enough to visit this a few years ago, and it's really a beautiful site. You can still see many of the mounds that are existing on the site, and you really get a feel as if you were back in older times visiting this site. It's very peaceful and very tranquil, and it's just really interesting to see how the whole site still looks today. So some of the things that we just talked about, the different types of mounds, what do you see here when you study this picture? Hopefully everybody sees right here where the cursor is, the big flood midden. Hopefully everybody sees the burial mound over here. And then we have several temple mounds, and you can see that one is bigger than the other. Now, I want everybody here to look at this flood midden. So why do you think that you might want to have your midden flood? Can everybody think on that? Well, we talked about that a midden is really a big trash heap, right? So if you had to have somewhere in your village where there might be a flood to occur, would you want it to be where your houses or your temples are? I don't think so. However, trash isn't nearly as important, so it might be okay if the midden were to flood. Additionally, the tribes could actually use the midden to help prevent flooding from going in further into their villages. So even though it was a big trash heap, it was helping to keep the village safe from flooding. Additionally, the trash that was put into that midden was mostly organic material like shells. So even if it was flooding, it wasn't putting trash like plastics and other things that we have today into the water. Now, the midden at this particular site grew to be quite large, and I'm wondering if anybody at home can guess how large it grew to be. I wonder who out there thinks that it might be as big as your bedroom. What about twice the size of your bedroom? Or 3 times? Or how about the size of a football field? Do you think it was bigger than a football field? If you said yes, you would be correct. The midden at this site actually grew over time to be almost as big as 4 football fields. That's a lot of trash over a long time. So let's talk briefly about the life of a platform mound. Now, mounds were built with different layers, and you can see here in the depiction all of the different layers that were put in place. So, step 1, a layer of white sand is laid to purify the area where the mound will be built. You can see the sand layer down here. Step 2, the tribe members would dump basket loads of dirt, creating a pyramid shape. Now, you can see the basket loads of dirt in this layer. Step 3, the top of the pyramid is flattened and a layer of red clay is added to help the mound keep its shape. So you can see the red clay mantle right here. And step 4, a house is built at the top. When the owner dies, the house is burned and the tribe members start over again at step 1. Hence why each time that somebody dies and a new house is built, the mound just continues to get bigger and bigger. So when you're looking at this, I'm wondering, can anybody out there tell me how many buildings have been on this mound? If you look very closely at the picture, you can see several building layers. If you said 2, that would be correct. I've also had people say 3 because there's probably one on top that you can't see in the picture. Now, I hope that you all paid attention to these steps in the life of a platform mound because there's an activity at the end of this lesson where you'll need to be able to use that knowledge to build your very own platform mound. So let's talk just briefly about some additional tribes. So we want to talk about the Seminoles. Now, the Seminoles were Creek Indians that moved to Florida from Alabama and Georgia. The name comes from the Spanish word cimarrone, which means runaway. They fought 3 wars with the United States government, and they never moved to Indian Territory in Oklahoma. And I think many of you probably know who the person is in this picture. Does anybody out there know who this is? If you said Chief Osceola, you would be correct. Now, there were also Black Seminoles, and these were escaped slaves from South Carolina who were welcomed by the Seminoles. They had a separate culture from the Seminoles, even though they lived with them very peacefully. And the photo here, the depiction that you see, is John Horse, who was an African-American and Seminole warrior, and he worked as an interpreter for Chief Osceola. Now, this is an example of a depiction of a Seminole village before the wars. So I want everybody to look at this image very carefully and tell me what you see. Now, most people are probably going to say that they see a small village, they see some trees, they maybe even see some buildings in here. And I want you to focus in on some of these buildings. Now, tell me, do you think that these buildings look like they're very portable? They don't, right? They look like this is supposed to be a more stationary village. However, once the Seminole War started, this type of a Seminole village was very difficult because the Seminoles had to constantly be moving around, and having something as permanent as of a village like this wasn't really very useful to them. So the Seminoles had to develop a different type of housing and a different type of building that they could have to be more easily portable as they were moving around quickly. So what developed was the Chickee. Many of you have probably seen a Chickee before. So the Chickee has a rectangular shape. It's made of wood and palm fronds, and it has a gable roof, which is a roof sloping downward in 2 parts at an angle from a central ridge. Now, a gable roof is our first architectural vocabulary term, and throughout the rest of our Heritage Education series, you're going to see many different vocabulary terms that you're going to need to remember. So I want everybody to think about a gable roof like an upside down V. So if everybody watching at home can go like this and make their upside down V, and repeat that that makes a gable roof. So the upside down V is the gable roof. And you're going to see this gable roof in many of our architectural styles that develop later on. Now, if everybody can look at this depiction of the Chickee, you can see here the wood supports, you can see the palm fronds, and you can see that there's a platform right here. So why might they want to have a platform? Does anybody have any ideas? Well, a few different things that typically come up is that you can see that there might be water nearby where they're building at. For example, you can see right here that there's water. So if they build this up on a platform, that would help to make sure that if there's a heavy rain or any type of flooding, that where people are actually living at isn't being flooded. Additionally, it helps keep them up higher than anything that might be crawling around on the ground, whether it be snakes or lizards or alligators or anything like that. And you can also see in some of the depictions that they even have their food that's hanging up higher. Everybody see that right here? So the Chickee was very useful because it allowed them, the Seminoles, to be able to move around and to build these wherever they went. And it was much more easily portable than the traditional village housing that you were seeing in that previous image. So let's do a brief review of the types of Indian mounds. So hopefully you all can tell me what this is. I'll give you a minute to think of it at home. This type of mound is called a midden, and remember, we wanted to call that our trash heap. All right, next up, does everybody remember what type of mound this is? If you said burial mound or a cemetery, that would be correct. And then we have our last type of mound right here, and that would be our platform mound, which was used for homes and temples. And does everybody remember what this is called? That's right, it's a Chickee. And don't forget that the Chickee is made of wood and palm fronds, and that the type of roof that we learned about, where you can see here with the two sloping sides from a central ridge, the upside down V, if everybody remembers that, that is our gable roof. So we have an exercise which you can find on the Preservation Foundation's website that can help you build your own platform mound. And you'll see on the next slide that we have a whole series of instructions to help you do this. Now, typically when we do this, we use clay, and we use brown, pink, beige, and orange clay. However, if you don't have that at home, you can use any type of clay, any other colors, or you could use Play-Doh or anything like that that could help you make your own platform mound. So what you'll need to do is just designate, if you have pink and purple and red and orange Play-Doh, you'll just need to designate those colors in place of the brown, pink, beige, and orange, so that when you follow the instructions, you're just substituting in your own colors. And what you're going to find is that as you go through the instructions, you're going to build your own platform mound. So you're going to build up layer after layer, just like would have happened with a real mound. And then at the end, you get to cut it open, just like an archaeologist would do when they're doing an exploration of a site. And you can actually see what the mound might look like. We also have some discussion questions and topics for you to look at after you've built the mound. So you can see here, this is what the instructions look like, and you'll find those on our website as well. Now, for everybody out there who wants to try this at home, I highly encourage you to read through all of the instructions first to make sure that you understand what's going to happen. Okay. Now, just as a preview for our next lesson, I hope that everybody out there knows how to use a tape measure. And if you do, I want you to think about making a floor plan of your bedroom. So use your tape measure and measure your bedroom. So in this example that you see on the screen, this bedroom is 10 feet by 12 feet. And you can see there's a bed that's drawn here and two nightstands. There's a door and a window. Now you might have some other things in your bedroom. Maybe you have a closet. Maybe you have a bathroom nearby. You might have a dresser or a desk, or anything like that. Try to add those things in so that you can get an idea of how big your bedroom is. And I want you all to work on that so that when we start our next lesson, you can keep in mind the size of your bedroom versus the houses that we're going to be learning about. Okay. All right, well, everyone, we've reached the end of our first heritage education lesson on the Native Americans and the first structures. I hope that everybody enjoyed this lesson and that you'll tune in again for the next lesson, which is going to be on our frame vernacular architecture. So, if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to reach out and contact us. But I hope that you enjoyed this lesson, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care and have a great day.